America is facing some tough challenges right now. Two of the most important are energy security and economic growth. North America actually has one of the largest oil reserves in the world. A large part of that is oil sands. This resource has the ability to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. At our Curl project in Canada, we'll be able to produce these oil sands with the same emissions as many other oils, and that's a huge breakthrough. That's good for our country's energy security and our economy.
When we talk about prosperity in Canada, increasingly, we're talking about Canadian energy. And we have to come to terms with that fact across this entire country. We've had a lot of rhetoric over the past 2 years on energy, a lot of rhetoric, but very little dialogue. And one thing that we have to remember is that for better or for worse, Canadian energy is the cornerstone of Canadian prosperity. That is the hand we've been dealt. And our job as Canadians is to figure out the best way to play that hand. And make no mistake, don't begrudge it. It is a beautiful hand to have. On the first deal, we were given a royal flush.
Fact. Last year we bought over 400 million barrels of oil from Saudi Arabia. We bankrolled a state that doesn't allow women to drive, doesn't allow them to leave their homes or work without their male guardian's permission, and a state where a woman's testimony only counts for a half of a man's. Why are we paying their bills and funding their oppression? Today there's a better way. Ethical oil from Canada's oil sands. Ethical oil. A choice we have to make.
I wrote a book 11 years ago called No Logo. And in the course of writing this book, I became an expert in corporate crap. And particularly the ways that corporations try to rebrand themselves. And, you know, I feel like I know that I've seen a lot of crap that corporations are capable of. Like, you know, I've studied running shoes that were supposed to lead to women's liberation and laptops that were going to start revolutions, and I studied the Beyond Petroleum BP campaign, but I have never seen anything quite as audacious as the campaign to rebrand the tar sands ethical oil. I'm from Canada, and let me tell you something. We don't have ethical oil in Canada. We have tar sands oil, which is like regular oil, but a whole lot dirtier. It ravages the earth as it is extracted.
In terms of oil sands operations, total land reclaimed here at Suncor is about 7%. Obviously, you know, our end goal is to reclaim everything, so it's a step in the process. But right now, it's pretty much on target. And
there have been papers that have come out recently showing that you can't reclaim the aquifers, that you can't reclaim the wetlands, that the cost of any reasonable reclamation are so high that there would be no money made on the oil sands.
Arsenic is a very clear-cut carcinogen. It's a cancer maker, and it is associated with bitumen production. The more you process those deposits, the more you're going to bring arsenic and lead and other heavy metals to the surface. And if you're not careful, over time, you will see larger and larger pulses of arsenic and other cancer makers enter waterways.
I began to notice patients had lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and bile duct cancers. statistically, I'm not supposed to see more than 1 in 100,000. It is certainly one that can be connected directly with toxins in the environment.
I looked into some of the types of cancers that are particularly elevated in Fort Chipewyan, and it's interesting, a lot of them have been linked to hydrocarbon exposures, in other words, exposures to oil and petroleum products. Leukemia and lymphoma, biliary tract cancer, and surprisingly, a very rare cancer called soft tissue sarcoma. As a physician, I've practiced medicine for many years. I've actually never seen a case of soft tissue sarcoma. It's a tragic and very, almost always fatal cancer, and it was surprising to see even 2 cases in a town this small. The cancer rates in this community are quite a bit higher than would be expected. The rates of leukemias and lymphomas were about 3 times higher than would be expected. The rates of bile duct cancer were 7 times higher than expected. The things that are interesting and worrisome about those particular cancers is that they have already, in scientific studies, been linked to exposures to petroleum products.
There was my Uncle Raymond. He had died with a brain tumor, and my granny, she died with cancer, and my auntie Albina, the Coyne, her too with cancer. And my Uncle Knapp on this side up here, him too, he had died with a brain tumor. So it was brain tumors and cancer they mostly died of.
For every barrel of oil that you get from the tar sands, you release 3 times as much carbon as you do from a conventional oil one in Texas or Saudi Arabia. So there's a big carbon liability there. If the whole world followed Canada down that route, which we could, we've all got, oil shales or other, carbon-dense forms of hydrocarbons, we would cook the earth.
And the analogy I always draw here is put a pot of water on a stove and turn the element up to 9. Well, what happens is the water doesn't boil right away, it takes some time. Let's suppose you realize that halfway along that, oh my goodness, the water's going to boil, I'm going to turn it down to 8. Well, guess what? The water still boils eventually. So let's suppose, as it's getting hotter and hotter, you turn it down to 7. And you think, I've solved the problem. Well, you haven't solved the problem. Water's still going to boil. The only way it doesn't is you turn it right off. And now take that pot off the stove. It doesn't cool right away. It takes a long time for that heat to be lost. And it's a very similar analogy with the global warming, is that the oceans are the water in that pot. The oceans are slowly warming up, bit by bit by bit. Even if we stop emitting greenhouse gases and maintain the fixed levels that we have today, that's the pot on the stove with number 7 instead of number 9, it's still going to warm. It's going to warm by about as much as already has happened in the last 150 years. So that's going to take us to a condition which has no ice in the summer in the Arctic, no matter what policy paths we do today. You can take that one step further. Between about 9 and 25% of all species on this planet are likely committed to extinction already because of the fact that we're going to warm by about 0.6, 0.7 degrees more anyway as we try to equilibrate to those greenhouse gases here that exist today. We have to ask the question, what about future generations?